Mas vamos lá, o Donald já está aqui, não? Vinheta para ele. Hi, Donald. How are you?
Conrado, hi. I'm very well, thank you. It looks like a great event you've got running here. Congratulations.
Are those real books?
No, it's all plastic. I don't read it all.
Or it's a fake background, Zoom background.
Exactly.
Today we just so you know, we are evaluating everyone's Zoom background today. We like yours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Do you notice that the globe, I turned the globe round to Brazil. So everyone feels at home.
And it's not a flat world. I mean, we have this kind of discussion recently here, but it looks like a globe, and I'm very, very glad for that. Gente, let me just talk 1 minute em português. Gente, eu conheci o Donald há alguns anos, como eu falei. O Learning Technology, para mim, é o melhor evento do mundo de educação. E ele organiza e tem uma visão maravilhosa desse assunto, então ele vai falar um pouquinho de tendências. Donald, I just mentioned that I met you at Learning Technology, and I really think that this is one of the best, if not the best, program in the world. More trendy in the perfect way. I mean, you talk not about the future, but things that is going to happen tomorrow. So thank you a lot for sharing all your knowledge, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Conrado. Great to be here. And let me start by saying I come here not as somebody who has all the answers. I have some information, and always this means more questions. And I'm always very suspicious. I've chaired the Learning Technologies Conference that Conrado was so generous about. I'm always very suspicious when people come and they say that what they have is the answer to everybody's problems. I think it's more complicated than that. Let me start. Here's my picture and the slides. I'll be going through these quite quickly. You will get the slides afterwards. I want to say this at the beginning. I'll say it at the end. This is a presentation, but I want it to be really part of a conversation. So at the end, please link in with me. I'm Donald H. Taylor on everything, on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Just find me, link in with me, and let's continue the conversation. You will get the slides afterwards. That link will take you through to the report. So let me tell you about the trends that I study each year in learning and development. First I have to say thank you to all my sponsors. Of course, sponsors are very important. That's what makes these things happen. So thank you for the sponsors and media partners for enabling me to do this research. There are 5 things I want to cover today. That thing in the middle, focus on Brazil, is a big part of the conversation. I really want to share with you the whole of my thinking about Brazil at the moment, which is not very much. I will ask you some questions. I would love it if you were able to then ask questions which Conrado can put to me afterwards, and we can have a discussion, because I'd like to build my understanding about the largest country in South America and what's happening in this crucial, important country. So here are the 5 things we're going to look at, and don't worry, the last one is just 2 slides. So we get through the end quite quickly. Let me look at the results of my international survey for this year. Very simply, I ask this question each year, or I have for the last 8 years asked this question: what will be hot in workplace learning and development next year? I give people 15 things to choose from, and they can choose one of those, they can choose 3 of those, and they can also say something else, an other option. 95 countries were represented, 3,000 people voted, and of those people, the majority of the votes, 91%, came from these 6 regions around the world, with South America being the smallest of them. Now, I just want to talk, before I go any further, about the caveats around this. And if you download the report, there's a whole page of caveats. What I like to do is give people information. I let you choose, do you believe it, don't you believe it, what does it mean, and how much can you trust it? But very quickly, the most important caveat is that these 3,000 people are not from all parts of learning and development. you know this curve, the diffusion of innovation curve from Everett Rogers. My respondents don't come from all over the curve. They come from down at the bottom left-hand side. So they come from the innovators and the early adopters. They're the people who are excited about technology, excited about learning, and so on. Why am I asking these people this question? I ask them the question because I want to know in 4 years' time, what's going to be important for the early majority, for the late majority. What that people think now is exciting is going to later on become more widely adopted. What's going to make the transition out of the innovators and the early adopters over to the rest of the curve? And that's what excites me. It's not the case that everything they like will become important later on, but it is the case that if something later on becomes important, that first off was of interest in the left-hand side of the curve. So that's what I'm interested in, and we're going to explore that now. Not everything takes off. Okay, so I give people a long list, 15 things and other to choose from. Each year I change 1 or 2 things on the list. This year, the new thing was reskilling and upskilling, and the thing I took off was video. Video was very important 8 years ago when I started the survey. Now it's just a regular part of what we do. So that was the list of things, and this is how the list ended up. Reskilling, upskilling was number 1. I'm going to look at this in a slightly different way. You can see the table there. I just want to talk about reskilling and upskilling being number 1 for a moment, because it's never happened before, and it's something that has dominated this table and the results. So this percentage, 13%, is the highest percentage of any number 1 on this table for the last 5 years. I asked an optional question this year, asking people where they worked. There were 5 possibilities. Across all of the 5 possibilities, reskilling and upskilling was the most important choice. So it was the highest option since for 5 years. It was the highest across all 5 areas of work. No option has ever been new on the table and gone straight into number 1. And it was number 1 across 5 of the 6 regions. We'll look at which region wasn't number 1 in just a second. So here we are. Here are the 4 areas of work and other. It was number 1 in all of those. And it was number 1 in each of 5 of the 6 regions. And you can see also, this is important, it wasn't really widely spread about. So sometimes North America, the USA, promotes an idea and there's a really big bar for the USA, and then everybody else catches up. Here, it's a very tight gap, 1.5%. And that means that everybody in the world is thinking the same thing. Reskilling and upskilling is important. Everybody, apart from South America. In South America, collaboration is number 1. Now that number 157 is driven largely by Brazil, where there's about 120 people voting. So most of that is Brazil we see there. And you can see the results are very different. So when we come to our focus on Brazil section, I really want to look at reskilling. I want to ask some questions about it to you. And I hope that we'll have time at the end for some questions and answers. So to recap, the first of the 3 big things to take away from the survey this year is reskilling and upskilling is dominating what people are thinking. The second thing, look at that table, look at those arrows on the right-hand side. That's the comparison with last year. What's gone up, what's gone down, what's stayed the same. All of the arrows, apart from other, all of the arrows are red and going down, apart from collaborative and social learning, where it's going up. And look at that in a second. It's very unusual for something when everything else is going down, for one thing to go up. And finally, the hot technologies, the exciting, sexy technology that everybody loves, nowhere this year, nowhere. Artificial intelligence fell down from number 5 last year. It fell 3.3% in the vote, which is a huge drop. And I've never had, in 8 years of the table, never had anything fall that quickly. virtual and augmented reality also fell. So my quick reaction to the table this year is, what you're seeing is people reacting to COVID-19. They are saying, I've got a job to do, which is reskilling and upskilling. I'm going to use the technology and the methods I trust, which you can see some of those on there. I've seen people use Zoom, Slack, Teams during the crisis, and I now trust collaborative and social learning, which is why that's gone up, but I'm not interested in the new stuff. I don't have time for it. So artificial intelligence, virtual reality, I'll push that to one side. It can wait. I'm not thinking about it now. So that is my quick reaction to the survey results. But now what I want to do is look at the key themes just a little bit more, to get a little bit more thinking about it. So firstly, reskilling and upskilling was new at number 1. And it's a big theme and it's important. Why did it get to number 1 from nowhere? I want to just look at it very quickly, because I really want to spend time on the Brazil stats. If you do a Google Trends analysis for the 2 words, reskilling and upskilling, you'll see that the popularity of these terms did not begin in January of 2020. In fact, they began somewhere around January 2019. What's happened is that the terms reskilling and upskilling have been used in those 2 years for 2 quite different things. The first way, and if you look at the tracks, it's very interesting, you can see a peak in the Google Trends reports, which corresponds to things which we know happened. So in the middle of June, in June 2019, you can see there was a conference about upskilling. That came out and there was an uptick in interest in the word upskilling. There was a very important report from the World Economic Forum in January of 2020, and that caused an uptick in interest in reskilling. And what's happened is the words have been around for a while. They've been around for about 2 years. And when people were doing the report, were doing the survey, they'd firstly, for about 12 months, look at the left-hand side of this timeline. For 12 months, they'd had people talking about reskilling because of AI and the future of work. So our jobs were going to change and we needed to therefore train people to do new jobs. Then, even in February 2020, it's still about talent gaps, that big one in the middle from McKinsey, but then it's all about COVID-19 and the pandemic and how we need to get people trained up to overcome the unemployment and the issues of new ways of working. So what we have here is 24 months of people talking about this word in 2 very different ways. And what happens is when I ask people at the end of the year, to describe the things that are important to them, they reach out for a word that describes how they feel. And in this case, they choose, as always, they choose the words that they see. It's what I call the ambient wordscape. Now, Conrado, this is not a real, wordscape is not a real word in English. I've invented it, but you've invented life-wide learning as well. So I kind of figure I'm on safe grounds here. I looked it up in Portuguese, paisagem ambiente de palavras. I don't know if that's anything like a real word or pronunciation. But what I'm talking about is that we have words around us that we choose. Reskilling and upskilling were there, they were ready to be used, and we plucked them out to use them to describe the very difficult work learning and development was tackling. Okay, in a minute, we're going to look at why Brazil didn't look at this in the same way. So that's the first thing, reskilling, upskilling. I think the word was there ready to be used, and that's why it's number 1. One reason for it. Another thing I want to look at is social and collaborative learning. Why has that gone an uptick? Well, as I said, this moved from being an academic idea to being something practical that people could actually do at some point in 2020. I just want to give credit to Jay Cross, who published the book Informal Learning in 2006, which revolutionized people's understanding of training. It did not have to be a course all the time. It was possible to learn things in other ways. After that, we had about 10 years of people talking about social learning. I don't think anybody was really doing it. And then last year, the pandemic struck. And what happened? Well, what happened was suddenly people were taking it very seriously. There was Zoom, Slack, the whole host of tools that you know about. People saw that learning was actually happening between people. And you have this line here of the orange line is collaborative and social learning. Collaborative learning and personalized learning have both been on the way down, but collaborative learning did an uptick last year on the back of this, in this year's report, on the back of this experience that we've had. But I just want to draw your attention. It was on a straight line going down, and then it bottomed out in 2020. In 2020, actually 3 countries voted higher for collaborative learning than previously. They're Australia, USA, and the UK. I will come back to that if we have time later on, because I think that might be significant. So collaborative learning is on the uptake because it's moved from being an idea to being a practical reality. What about those sexy technologies that now suddenly people are not interested in? Here's a 5-year view of the results of the survey. If you look at virtual and augmented reality, you can see it's doing what a lot of options do on the survey. They start off popular and they slowly make their way down. This is to be expected. VR can do great things, but right now it's not the right tool. So this is a tool there's been a lot of excitement about. Now people aren't talking about it so excitedly, and then it will come back. But it always does. If you look at artificial intelligence, the pattern is slightly different. That started off in 2017, rose up, was very popular in 2019, started its way down. If you look at that curve, you expect it to be about number 8 this year. But this year, what happened was it fell to number 12. As I say, it was a huge drop, 3.3%. Never had anything like it in the history of the survey. And what's happened here is that this is the normal trend for a new technology. You're familiar, of course, with the Gartner hype cycle. What happened was artificial intelligence was right at the top of that peak of expectation. Everyone was excited about it, and then reality hit. It was going to come down anyway this year, but suddenly everyone was flat out trying to train people during a pandemic, change everything. They did not have time to think about something like artificial intelligence. They pushed it to one side and it fell very quickly down to the trough. It will come out again. It will come out either because it is being used as artificial intelligence or because platform providers are using it in the background to deliver a better service. One way or the other, artificial intelligence is going to change what we do. It's just that people aren't looking for it right now. Okay, let me take a sip of water. We'll have a focus on Brazil. When I see that, of course, sadly, I've never been to Brazil. I hope next year to come. But when I see that, all I can think about, of course, is the Brazilian football team. And David Luiz, who's a defender for my team, Arsenal. And it makes me feel excited. I can't wait to see some great international football again. Let's compare Brazil and all the other countries apart from Brazil. You remember I said that the vote in Brazil was different from the rest of the world, and we have to look at reskilling and upskilling. Why is it so different in Brazil? Why is the vote so different in Brazil to the rest of the world? Everybody else seems to think it's important. I think the answer comes in the question: what will be hot in workplace learning and development in 2021? I don't define what hot means, but I expect that people think, oh, exciting, new, something that's really happening. I ask you this question and I want your reaction in the chat, and I would love you to feed things through to Conrado about this for the end. But my view is that probably looking at the statistics around the economy, most economies that were voting about this were doing okay up till 2020, and then they suffered a setback as a result of the pandemic. And everyone was talking about reskilling and upskilling, as we've seen, in order to look after the future of work, but particularly to get people out of the pandemic. The unemployment rate in Brazil has been at a reasonably high level for something like 3 or 4 years. I kind of figure that people in Brazil are already doing this. I think it's not hot because most people in L&D in Brazil are almost certainly reskilling and upskilling and have been doing it for 3 or 4 years. So that's why I think it's not such a big topic. But I will say this, if you look at it, it is number 3 on the list. I kind of think people in Brazil, and it's a guess, but I'd love your input, I think people want to do reskilling and upskilling, but they accept that's happening. They're looking at number 1 and number 2, collaborative learning, using great learning experience platforms to make it happen. So number 3 is the aim, number 1 and 2 is the how. How will I get there? So the ones in blue here are higher for Brazil than for the rest of the world. And actually, not only are they higher than Brazil for the rest of the world, they are the highest in Brazil of any of the key countries that we have in this survey. The key countries are those with at least 2% of the global vote. So Brazil has four number ones of the whole survey. People in Brazil quite simply are thinking differently. What about the areas where Brazil is less enthusiastic about things? Well, consulting with the business and showing value are 12 and 10. And I'm going to come back to that later on because that does worry me. So just remember those 2 things, consulting and showing value, for me are really important because they show what learning development is doing. I always like to compare a couple of countries where I think there's an interesting comparison to be made. And for Brazil, it has to be with the USA because 2 large countries in the Americas and so very different on this survey. Brazil here is gray, USA is orange. The USA puts a huge value on reskilling, higher than the average for the world. Brazil, as we've seen, is the least enthusiastic of all of the 12 countries. On the other hand, with collaborative and social learning, Brazil leads the pack and USA is less interested in it. They're both way apart from the average. In fact, Brazil is not just far apart from the average. Brazil is number 1 of all the key countries in the world. Spain is number 2, but it's a big gap between Brazil and Spain, over 2%. So Brazil is far and away the country in the world most interested in collaborative and social learning. And then if we go forward, you can see that again, there's a big difference with learning experience platform. Huge interest in that in Brazil, actually a bit less interest in the USA. I just want to ask a question here to the audience again. Look at the red dots here. That's the difference between collaboration and personalization in Brazil. And look at the USA, where you've got blue dots around the USA's position. I don't know, but I'm asking you, do you think this is a reflection of the idea that in Brazil, there is a greater sense of collectivism, and in the USA, there's a greater sense of individualism? It is consistently the case that in the USA, they vote for personalization, as here, personalization ahead of collaboration. Thanks to Conrado, I've got great data from Brazil. It's the first time I've got that. I can't say what the pattern is for Brazil, but I'm longing to come back next year, maybe in person, fly down to Brazil and show you what the results are and see if this is a trend that Brazilians tend to favor the collaborative over the individual. I don't know, it's a question for you. Learning experience platforms, again, Brazil is not just ahead of the average, it's way ahead of the average. Again, the number 2 is Spain, and again, there's a 2% difference between them. So to sum this up, Brazil is more interested in collaboration, more interested in learning experience platforms, and it's less interested in reskilling and upskilling and personalization than the US and than the rest of the world. I said I was going to come back to these 2, and here we are. Brazil, which is in gray here, is far to the left of the average for the world and also far to the left of the USA. These are 2 things which are very dear to my heart. I believe that if we're working with a business, we need to collaborate with it, we need to consult with it, and then when we've done something, we absolutely need to show the value of what we've done. I think without that, learning and development will never, never become a strategic partner. And my concern is that in Brazil, it seems to be low. Now, it may be it's already happening in Brazil. Remember the question, what's going to be hot? If you're already doing something, it's not hot. So perhaps these scores are low for Brazil because it's not important, because it's part of what Brazil does every day. But it may also be the case that it's not taken seriously enough. It may also be there's a translation issue here. So there's lots of reasons for that. I would love to have a Q&A about that at the end. Let me wrap up with my thoughts here. So firstly, Brazil is different. You'll be pleased to know Brazil is different from the rest. You've got the highest scores in the world for these 4 things and the lowest scores in the world for these 3 things. I kind of believe that Brazil is interested in supporting the individual, giving them a great learning experience and doing it collectively. There are caveats for this. We don't know how much this is just a sampling error, because I've got one particular group of people in Brazil, and we can't look at it historically. So I give you this information, and as I said at the beginning, I invite you to make your mind up about what it means for you and for Brazil. I really want to come back and do a presentation again next year with more information and look at the trends. Very quickly, I'm going to look at what the future holds, and then we'll wrap up and have some questions. Within the group, there are 2, within my population group, there are 2 groups, A and B, that I can differentiate between. Group A is innovative, likes methodology, and excited about the latest stuff. Group B are the people at work who are really concerned about doing a good job, and they will use the ideas of Group A if they think they're going to be valuable practically for doing work. And on the curve that we looked at earlier, Group A is roughly equivalent to the innovators and Group B to the early adopters. I can divide these up for the whole population. Group A is a much smaller group, and that's what you'd expect. And you can see that, coming back to my pet subjects of showing value and consulting with the business, Group A thinks this is important, but Group B typically does not. This worries me generally. But remember, I split the population up between 5 different places where people work. If you just look at people who say they're working at learning and development in the workplace, they're not vendors, they're not in education, they're not freelancers. They work in learning and development in the workplace. If you do that, then you can see that these people take showing value, and particularly they take consulting with the business much more seriously. Now, this gives me hope for the future. Remember, I said I'm interested in what moves out of the innovation space over to the rest of the curve. This makes me hope there is a chance that people at work in L&D will take these 2 things more seriously. Let's wrap up, and then let's go to some Q&A. Firstly, everybody in the world is talking about reskilling and upskilling, apart from Brazil. Well, Brazil thinks it's important, but knows it needs to get the job done. Collaborative learning has moved from theory to practice, and it is huge in Brazil. And I suspect that's down to something. I'm going to hold my book up. If you could just go over to the camera. I don't know if you're familiar with this book, Culture and Organizations. If you're interested in culture, I'd go for one of those or one of those. And get yourself in touch with some really great thinking on culture. I think collaborative learning will always be big in Brazil, for that reason we talked about earlier, the fact of it being a more collective mentality, possibly. Hot technologies are out this year because people just haven't got time for it. They're too busy. But I do believe a core of learning and development practitioners looking at this and other things in the survey will have a new focus in 2021, which will be the focus on working with the business and providing value. So I think this year can be about building a new strategic influence for learning and development based on working with the business, based on providing value on a solid foundation. So here's the report. That's the URL, and at some point I'll drop it into the chat. But as I say, oh, you get a summary if you go to that as well, a summary and the report to download. As I say, this is the beginning of this is a presentation, but it's, I hope, the beginning of a conversation. Please get in touch with me on LinkedIn. Let's stay in touch and let's be sharing thinking about it. I believe in experts, but I don't believe anybody has all the right answers. So I'm hoping that if you've got questions, come to me and I'll hope to answer them, or I can put you in touch with other people who can, and I'll have questions for you. Let's stay in touch and have the conversation. Conrado, that's me done. Over to you.
So good to have some local information. I mean, it was a good idea for having some content for Brazil. And I mean,
Thank you for making it possible, Conrado.
Please. And I think it's interesting, and when I saw the results also, because upskilling and reskilling is so important. But let's start talking first about technology, Deb.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Donald, one question we have for you is, based on all you showed to us, is it still a big challenge for a lot of the L&D professionals to build business cases that we can promote and approve and allow learning technology in our space? And I think maybe that's one of the obstacles as well for trying to understand more reskilling and upskilling, because in the world that we live today, we will need more learning technologies, right? So what is your tips for the L&D professionals that are today with us? What we should focus on when building a business case?
I love the question. It's a great question, and you're right. There is a real issue there. And the answer is start with the why. Why do we need this? Never go out with a request for money, especially at the moment. Always go out with a business case. And how do you build a business case? Well, that's all behind that option of mine, consulting more deeply with the business. That means you go and you talk, you ask questions, and you listen, and you ask why, and you listen, and you ask why, and you develop the case. And the case is what enables you to go back to the business and say, for example, we have a high turnover of staff, we have a low quality output, we have customer complaints. I believe we can solve those issues. To do that, we're going to need to invest in some technology. The technology will cost X, but the benefit will be 3 times X. So let's start. So I think it always starts. And I know it's an issue, no question about it. I talk to people all the time about this, and I feel your pain. To get that money, to get that budget, you've got to talk to the business, not as somebody who provides courses, not as somebody who fixes people, but as somebody who can help solve business problems. You go out, you have the conversation, answer the why, and it all starts from there.
Thank you. Thank you a lot, Donald. I'm changing my questions here because I think I'm going to have the same question on learning culture. I have the other one. Actually, I put them together. The thing is that upskilling and reskilling is so important.
Yep.
And my first question would be how learning culture can help in such a specific matter, and that needs also formal training like upskilling and reskilling. But the second one is how to create a business case to investment in different investments in learning culture, the initiatives that are needed to be in place to spread the new learning culture.
So to take those two in order to, culture is a crucial part of reskilling and upskilling. If you take your people seriously, if you want to develop them, if you have a culture of learning in your organization, things will be set up to remove all the barriers or to reduce the barriers between the individual and learning. And if you don't have a culture of learning, if you have a culture of control, then those people are expendable, you can get rid of them and you can buy other people in. But unfortunately, it's bad for the people and it's bad for the business. There's a real cost in that, which is very difficult for the business to maintain. So culture is a crucial part of effective reskilling and upskilling, because without it, you're having to do more work because you have more people to train, and it's more difficult because managers and other people in the organization and the mechanism for training and learning will be more difficult. So the culture is crucial. So then the question is, well, how do we get the okay to invest in a culture of learning? And I think the answer comes back to the same point I raised just now. It's about the why. If you can make the case that doing something will result in improved business, you have the ears of the business. You then have to say, in order to achieve that, we need to do some investment, maybe in some learning technology, but maybe also we need to invest in something to reduce the barriers to learning. And that means building a learning culture. It does mean that you've got to have the right conversations. It also really helps if you have somebody in your organization who trusts you and believes in you, that you have a great relationship with. I've worked with learning technology since I started in computer programming in the mid-1980s. I love technology, but ultimately the answers to these questions always come down to people.
Well, thank you a lot for your time, for the research, and a lot of things that we're going to be together. This year, Learning Technology will be online in June.
Yeah,
Can you talk a little bit about it?
It might be June, it might be July, we don't know yet. Yep.
And what about next year? Are you going to bring a group of Brazilians over there?
Next year, Conrado, you're going to bring a group of Brazilians, and I'm going to make sure that you have a great time. We're going to get special time for your Brazilian delegation with some of the speakers. I'll make time available. We'll look at what your special needs are, and we're going to absolutely support you in doing that. It's a long journey. I want to make sure that when you arrive in London, you really find it's beneficial.
Okay, you want to see the Queen. I don't know if it's possible, just maybe half an hour with her.
Obviously, anything that's required, Conrado, we will make it happen just for you.
Okay, thank you a lot again.
My
Bye-bye.
pleasure. Great to be here. Thanks so much.
Muito bom, gente. Então só vai ter em julho a conferência dele, vai definir a data. É uma baita conferência, são 2 dias, tem uma pré-conferência, alguns cursos. Eu fiz o curso com um workshop de um dia inteiro com o Nigel nessa pré-conferência. E a ideia é que a gente vai organizar uma delegação para ir para lá em janeiro. E o que ele falou agora, ele vai chamar tempo específico com os palestrantes, com ele, acho que vai ser super bacana.